this guy is really a hero to me of the pro-life movement because he kind of swims upstream given his environment that he comes from. And he's often called America's Rabbi, Rabbi Lapin. Are you there, Rabbi Lapin?
I sure am. Thank you very much, Mark. Great to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Listen, you've written this article. We read this article about you talking about what's called the Gathering Storm, and now we see that you have this two-set CD collection talking about this. And basically, you're making a point that I've always made, and that is that if America thinks that it can avoid judgment doing the things that we're doing today, we are whistling past the graveyard. We're crazy as drugstore rats if we think that we're not going to get judged over this. And that's usually seen as some sort of position that right-wing, fundamentalist Christian nutcases like me would take. But you're taking the same position, are you not?
I am, and what I'm trying to do in this particular CD program that you alluded to, The Gathering Storm, I'm trying to point out that you don't even have to be religious to understand that negative consequences follow when a society does really stupid things. I mean, to just give you an example, it's less than 100 years ago, many Americans used to go for the cure. For medical reasons, they would go and sit deep underground in uranium mines in Wyoming and Montana. And it wasn't until decades later, as these people's skin began falling off their bodies and they began to die from radiation illness, that everyone said, whoa, bad mistake, uranium, not good. And so there we have a perfect example of something invisible. You couldn't see it, you couldn't touch it, you couldn't hear it, you couldn't feel it, that people thought was a wonderful idea for society, namely go sit in uranium mines, and that's going to make you healthy. And instead what you had was something that wiped you out. And so I'm saying similarly, right now, there are people in America, a lot of people in America, diminishing numbers, but still a lot of people in America who think it's a really, really good idea to spread abortion and to promote abortion. And there are people who will actually choose a presidential candidate on the basis of how leniently they view the act of killing a fetus. So my point is that you can't see the problem, you can't hear it, you can't touch it, and it's probably going to be a couple of decades when people are going to say, what were they thinking of at the end of the 20th and early 21st century? Didn't they know that that was going to cause a society to move from decadence to complete oblivion?
Yes, and you make the point that in the Old Testament that the unborn child is directly referred to in the context of the judgment on a nation.
Well, this is really interesting, yes, and here again, there are people who dismiss the Bible as the mindless ramblings of some itinerant Bedouin tribe thousands of years ago. And then there are other people who, again, do not necessarily have to be religious. You just have to be halfway intelligent to say to yourself, well, wait a second, this is a book that was first printed in 1452 by Johann Gutenberg. It's never been out of print since then, which is, a whole lot more than can be said for most other books. And perhaps there's a reason for that. Perhaps the discussion of the events leading up to the flood, which is our blueprint in the Bible of a society that is being eliminated, perhaps those events, with the events that I call the Gathering Storm, perhaps those events really do serve as a blueprint, as a depiction of the various things which do cause a society to finally vanish off the surface of the earth, as has happened to so many other societies. And sure enough, in chapter 6 of Genesis, there is a reference to an arrival of a certain type of human being. And here's what's interesting. In the King James translation, they're usually referred to as the giants. In Hebrew, they're called the Nephilim. And I joke that everybody needs a rabbi. And one of the reasons is because the translation is very inadequate. And if you like, would you want me to tell you what that word means?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Hebrew, it actually means the fallen, because the Hebrew word nafal, which is the root of that word, means fall. And what's really interesting is that so much of English as a language is derived from Hebrew. So just as an aside, I'll mention that an N used to be found at the beginning of many English words, which then fell away. So, for instance, you will see books, I mean, not even books that old, but, stuff written 100 years ago. A woman's apron used to have an N in front of the word. It used to be called a napron. And the N eventually fell away. We just, that's why the indefinite article became an instead of a when you wanted to speak about something that started with a vowel, because the N moved, as it were, without going into the linguistics. But my point is the Hebrew word for fall are the three consonants, N, F, L. And when the N falls away, you can see the remaining consonants are F and L, which are the consonants of the word fall. And it speaks of these fallen ones. And just before that, immediately before that, the verse talks about privileged guys taking whatever girls they wanted. Well, what are we talking about? They're talking about a tendency in any society and in every society. I don't care if you're talking about an African tribe or an Arabian tribe, or whether you're talking about something going on in a large anonymous American city, and that is men will exploit women. I mean, that will happen. Outside of institutions of morality and law, men will exploit women. And I don't care if you're talking about Harvard or Yale University students who get poor girls in town pregnant, or whether it's in some street gang, or whether it's in some suburban neighborhood where a high school girl ends up pregnant because some high school boy exploited her. But the bottom line of all of that always is going to be unwanted pregnancies. And what is the result of an unwanted pregnancy? Well, there are only two possibilities. One is an abortion, and the other is a child that falls into the world uncared for, no father, no family, and pretty much no future. And that's really what this is talking about, that as a society becomes decrepit and damaged, what you end up with is a slew of killings of babies, or babies born into the world that nobody cares about and are raised in terrible, terrible ways. Obviously, a better alternative than abortion, but the picture that is being painted in chapter 6 of Genesis is of a declining society. And I don't have to tell you that, as any police department of any city will tell you, the overwhelming majority of violent crime committed by boys raised without fathers.
Absolutely. Talking about the declining society, we went to an event in Fort Worth here a few weeks ago at the Fort Worth Cats minor league baseball stadium, and they had a kind of an open house type thing there. And and one of the participants there was the Fort Worth Police Department. They had police cars there, and you could sit in a police car, and they had police dogs. And I got to talking to one of these police officers, and he had gotten off the SWAT team and was now in the drug enforcement because he'd been shot 3 times while he was on the SWAT team. So we got to talking, and I said, I remember when I was in high school in Fort Worth, there was a television show done on a guy who was retiring at the Fort Worth Police Department after 38 years or something as an officer. They did a little thing on the news about him. And he said in that show, I remember this when I was a kid, that in the whole 38 years he'd been in the Fort Worth Police Department, he'd never once pulled his gun. And now these officers have to do it 2 and 3 times a day sometimes.
Wow. Yeah.
And to me, that was an indicator of how far the society has come.
Look, that's the key thing that people have to understand. And that's why, whilst I know exactly what you mean, I generally, when I do speeches on the destructive impact on abortion and why we'll be able to blame abortion for the eventual decline of our society, I try even not to use the word judgment, because as soon as I say God will punish us for doing this, the suave, sophisticated elite smirk.
Yes. Rabbi, I have to ask you, and I have to admit that when I learned a few years ago that Jewish people as a whole are pro-choice, pro-abortion, I was shocked, because innocent Jewish people have been killed and slaughtered by the millions, I would think they would come out in defense of innocent people, being the unborn.
Okay,
I was stunned to learn that.
Here's the mistake you're making. You're assuming there's a thing called the Jewish community. And it just isn't so. There are American Jews, a small proportion of American Jews, perhaps 15 or 20%, for whom the Bible is the Word of God and who are ardently and vociferously pro-life. And then you've got about 80 or 85% of Jews in America who have long ago abandoned the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And nobody does very well, no human being does very well without something to believe in. So not surprisingly, if you abandon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as C.S. Lewis said so eloquently, I think it was C.S. Lewis, you don't end up believing in nothing, you believe in almost anything. And what's happened is they've replaced the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with the God of secular fundamentalism.
And that's no different than conservative Christians. I mean, you've got people that are pastors of churches, good church members, go every Sunday, who will sit right here in Denton, Texas, the buckle of the Bible belt, call themselves born-again, Bible-believing, washed in the blood of Jesus Christians, who will take their own child for an abortion if she gets pregnant.
Yeah.
Now, Rabbi Lapin, even though we have the scriptures that really clearly shows how cultures decline when they start adopting abortion, homosexuality, and other things, but the scriptures are not the only thing that shows that decline in a nation, right?
How do you mean?
In other words, the scriptures really show this is what happens when a nation forget God. This is what happens when you start bringing in ungodly things. There's a consequence to everything that you society
that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
History,
no, absolutely.
yeah.
Look, as soon as a culture accepts the not only that abortion is okay, but it's somehow it's a great moral good. I'm fighting for the rights of women. As soon as you start believing that, then all kinds of other acts of violence also become potentially okay and positive. Right. And little by little, we find that the acceptance of abortion leads to an acceptance of all kinds of increased violence and increased intrusion on other people's lives within a society. And again, that's something I describe very fully in my audio series, that I really want people to understand. Don't think that the way this works is that, God sees you're doing abortions and he's going to send thunder and lightning and brimstone and destroy your society like he destroyed the city of Sodom. We don't. He'll destroy our society, but it's going to be a lot more subtle than fire and brimstone.
See, I think what you're saying is something I've said, and we've talked about here on this show before. I think what God's judgment in this country is going to be is he's not going to send lightning bolts from the air. What he's going to do is say, okay, you want a king, have a king. I'm stepping back. Y'all just do it the way you want to do it. And because he knows that will destroy us. That'll be the biggest punishment we could have.
But it's also fundamental. You don't have to use the word judgment. It's simply like gravity. Exactly. If you jump off a building, you're going to fall splat onto the sidewalk.
It's really important that people understand that there are steps you take which cause the collapse of a culture, and abortion is right there at the top of those steps.
Absolutely, absolutely. We're about out of time, and I just want to, again, say how much we appreciate your being on with us today. And we're going to tell people how to get your CD presentation here, because I think this is a message that every American, and like you say, I don't think the person has to be particularly religious or spiritual to understand that there are consequences to what we're doing.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That's the point. Yeah.
And we're starting to see those consequences already. They're impacting America right now. We're just too stupid to see them. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, religion and the Bible provide the roadmap, but you don't have to believe in the AAA to follow the map.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi Lapin.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.